So today we're going to talk about oil changes on vehicles. Well, specifically we're going to do an oil change on a 2001 Nissan Pathfinder, four-wheel drive. This is fairly generic for most cars, and we'll cover the general principles as well as, specifically what I'm doing. The only thing that's really specific to this car is going to be the sockets and the filter that we use. But other than that, it's a fairly generic video that'll apply to most any auto oil change that you're going to do. So I like to use the Amazon Basics high mileage oil for this car, 5W30. The interesting thing about the Amazon Basics oil is a lot of people for synthetics will use some of the full synthetics from some of the other oil manufacturers. But the interesting thing about this one is that it has all of the highest ratings that are currently available for automotive oil. It even beats out some of the other ones. There's very few oils on the market right now that have all of these certifications. So that's why I like this oil, and it has a good price. It's very competitively priced as well. So the filter I like to use is I like the PurolatorBOSS filters. They have a good amount of filtration. They have good flow through the filter as well. I've had very good luck with the Purolator. It's a very highly rated filter. So this is the filter that I like to use as well. The other thing you'll need in order to do a good oil change is you really want a crush washer. Now I use the Dorman. They're a good manufacturer. This is the specifications for this particular automobile. You can get them for any size drain plug, and you'll notice that it has a ridge and a flat side, as well as a side that screws onto the drain plug. This will crush when you put the drain plug in, and that's what gives it the seal. Now some people, when they remove the drain plug, see a flat copper piece there and think that it's a flat copper washer. It's not. It's one of these crush washers. You really shouldn't reuse that. I know a lot of people do, especially if you're changing the oil yourself, but you really shouldn't. Now some of the auto oil change places will use crush washers, but some of them will put in either a flat copper washer or a plastic washer because it's cheaper, it's easier for them. So there's some good oil change places out there. You just need to be sure what they're doing when they're changing your oil. Now, one of the reasons why we're showing you this on all this detail on this video is because it saves you a lot of money if you do it yourself. It's not a hard process. It just takes a little bit of time. Most people can get it knocked out in 20 minutes to a half hour at the most. So this is a good way to save some money and to make sure that your car is being taken care of properly, because you know exactly what kind of oil is going in it. You know that you're using the right parts like the crush washer and the filter, and you're not getting some generic that may not be quite as good as just going ahead and do it yourself. So this is one of those times where doing it yourself just may actually be a better quality than if you take it to, quote, a professional shop. So one thing that might make your life a lot easier is if you loosen the fill cap on your engine, and that will allow the air to come into the engine as the oil is draining out through the pan. It just makes life a little easier. It's not required. It just makes things go a little quicker and smoother. The other thing you might think of, especially doing it at home, is you may want to let your car cool down a bit. Now, if it's cold weather, like in the winter time, you may want to run your car around the block once or twice just to get it a little bit warm so the oil flows a little better. Right now, we're in the beginning of the summer in Arizona. Things are pretty warm as it is, so we don't need to warm up this engine. So just a little bit of looseness on the cap, and then we can go ahead and drain the oil. Now, I always bring some paper towels underneath the car with me because inevitably you're going to get drips, especially if you're doing the oil change on the ground. Even if you jack the car up so you have a little more room, you're still going to get a few drips. So think in advance and take a few paper towels with you so you can sop up the drips as soon as they happen and you're not leaving too much of a stain on your driveway. The next thing you'll do is you'll need to loosen the drain plug. Now on this particular car, it's a 14 millimeter. So just take and loosen it just so that you kind of get that pop. Once it kind of pops loose, it's very loose and you can take it off with your fingers. At that point, you don't need your socket set anymore. Set that aside, get the drain pan put in place so that it'll drain properly. And be sure and be aware that it's going to go out in an arc initially, and then it's going to drip right down. So you need to position your drain pan so it catches both of those. Most drain pans are big enough to do that, so just be aware that that's what you're doing. So now that I've got the drain pan in place, I'm going to now undo the drain plug. You notice I kind of get on the top side of it, and that way I'll still get some oil on me, but I won't get a handful of oil as that stream comes down the middle of the hand. So now it's loose, and here it comes. Now when you've got your oil pan full and you're down to just a few dribbles on your out of your oil pan, you're going to now want to start moving the oil in the oil pan. Now be aware that if it's on cement or dirt, it's going to be a little jiggly. You're going to want to move it slowly and consistently so you're not splashing it around. You don't want to splash it all over your driveway or wherever you're working. So move it slowly and consistently. Now you want to take your paper towel and you want to wipe the seal surface on your pan carefully, and you'll notice that it's got a real nice bright shine where it's been machined so that it sits nicely with the drain plug. Once you get it wiped clean, go ahead and put the drain plug in. Finger tighten it down until it hits the crush washer, and then at that point you can take your socket and go ahead and tighten it on up. Don't be a grease monkey and try and tighten everything down as much as possible. You don't have to. You just need to get it good and snug so as it's not going to come loose. So one of the nice things about working on the Pathfinder is when it's an SUV that's already up off the ground, because this is a off-road version of the Pathfinder. And so I can get underneath and get to everything just by sliding underneath the vehicle. You'll notice though that they paid specific attention to the oil filter. So while it's easy to get to the drain plug, it's also very easy to get to the oil filter. The oil filter is right here in front. They've got a little drain pan to guide the oil as it comes out from the bottom of the oil filter. Because we can get right at the oil filter right there in front, it becomes very easy to change the oil filter. I always recommend changing the oil filter every time you do the oil change. Some people say, well, I've got a 10,000 mile oil filter, I'll only do it every other, every third change. It's not that much money, and it just gives you better protection. For each oil filter, you can get a oil filter wrench that is segmented on the inside to attach to different oil filters. Now all oil filters are not the same size, so you'll have to figure out which size works for the particular oil filter you use. This is the one that works on the Purolator that I use on the Nissan, on the Pathfinder. It has a 3/8 inch socket hole in the back, and so I put a nice long extension on my ratchet, and that way I can get up into the filter very easily and loosen it. Again, all you have to do is just loosen it with the ratchet, and at that point you can take it off. Now remember, when you take off the oil filter, it's going to drain a lot of oil out. So you want to be sure and tilt it down over the oil pan and drain it out into the oil pan that you've got for capturing the oil before you then grab it with a paper towel or something to keep it from dripping as you pull it on out of the car. Again, let it drain for a while to make sure you get as much oil out as you possibly can. Now that we've let it drain, we're now going to take and replace the oil filter. Again, take your paper towel and wipe the sealing surfaces off very well. And the oil filters always recommend you put a little film of oil on the oil seal, the little rubber seal around the outside. They always say use clean oil. Frankly, it really doesn't matter unless your oil is really, really gummy. I just use the oil that's in the oil pan because all you're looking for is just a little bit of lubrication so as that you can tighten it down. Now that I've got the oil filter threaded back on, you want to take, and your hands are probably sweaty or greasy or oily, take a paper towel and or a rag and tighten it down as much as you can with your hand. You want to hand tighten it. Now most of them will tell you that you need to go one turn beyond where it engages. You know, they'll say where it's tight, but they really mean where that rubber engages. You can usually get about half a turn, maybe 3/4 of a turn with your hand. Then put your tool back on and crank it about another half a turn and you're good to go. Now again, just like with the drain plug, don't be a grease monkey and try and tighten everything down as much as possible. You don't have to. You just need to get it good and snug so as it's not going to come loose. You need to get the oil filter good and snug just so as that it holds the oil. That's why they recommend only a turn to turn and a quarter, turn and a half, so as you're not over tightening these things. Now that we've already loosened the oil fill cap, in order to let the oil drain out nicely, we just need to finish removing it so as that we can put the oil in. Now, I like to use funnels. I think they make the job a lot easier. Yes, you have to clean the funnel. And frankly, I don't have as steady a hand to just pour it in directly into the fill cap or into the fill tube. If you've got steady hands like that, go for it. But I like to use things that make my life easier, and having a funnel makes it a lot easier. So then go ahead and start putting the oil in. Now, I recommend that you put in about 3/4 of the amount of oil that your owner's manual calls for. So this one calls for 4 1/4 quarts of oil. So I'll put in 3 quarts of oil. At that point, we'll start the car, and that'll let the oil filter fill up with oil and stabilize the level of the oil in the car. For that short period of time, it's not going to hurt the car, and then you get a more accurate fill when you start putting the last little bit in. So we've got 3 quarts of oil in the engine at this point. I'm now going to go start the engine, let it run for a couple of minutes at the most. Make sure that the oil pressure light goes off, and that'll make sure that the oil filter is now full of oil. Some people like to rev the engine. I know that's done frequently in these oil change places. If you rev it just a little bit. You know, don't go over 2,000 RPM at the most. Now, don't automatically put in the amount of oil that it says in the owner's manual. That's fundamentally if you've got a brand new, clean engine that's never had oil in it before. There'll always be some residual in your engine. So if it says, like for ours, 4 1/4, I will pour 3 3/4, and then I'll start measuring. Remember that it takes a little while for the oil to all drain down into the lower part of the engine where the dipstick measures the oil. So give it a few minutes after you add some oil before you check it, and then just fill it until you see it on the dipstick at the full block. There'll be a space on the dipstick that anywhere in that space is full. Try and keep it closer to the middle, but again, you know, if it's at the very bottom or the very top, your engine's going to be just fine. Most fill caps will have some kind of a rubber gasket or O-ring here. Just like with the oil filter, you want to put a little bit of oil on there just to make sure that it's lubed up so it tightens up nicely. Then go ahead and put it back in and tighten it down. Depending upon the nature, you either just tighten it down snug. This one has a clicker, so you just run it until you hear it click a couple of times, and then it's on there nicely. Be sure you dispose of your used oil in an environmental sensitive way. Most parts supply stores will have the ability to take used oil. In many states, it's absolutely required by law that they take your used oil. So don't just throw it in the garbage can to go in the landfill. Be sure you take it somewhere where it can be disposed of properly. Hope you've enjoyed this video. We'll show you the different tools and parts that we used down below this video, and hope to see you again next time.